Deep beneath the churning, ice-cold waves of Lake Superior lies a multi-million-dollar secret that has baffled investigators for over a century. A steel leviathan, longer than a football field and hailed as the pinnacle of industrial engineering, suddenly vanishing from the face of the earth. In the winter of 1908, the SS D.M. Clemson, a vessel that had survived every trial the lakes threw at it, steamed into a blinding whiteout and simply blinked out of existence. There was no SOS. No debris field large enough to tell a story. Even as the latest 2025 deep-sea sonar technology uncovers the lost ships of history, this massive titan remains a defiant shadow in the dark. Was it a hidden mechanical betrayal, a fatal decision by a captain on the verge of retirement, or a structural time bomb ticking away in its hull? Today, we reopen the files on the Great Lakes' most enduring cold case. Stay with us until the very end, because the clues found in the wreckage of its sister ship might finally reveal what truly destroyed the indestructible D.M. Clemson. By the late 19th century, the Great Lakes had become the brutal epicenter of the American Industrial Revolution. It was an era of violent mechanical transformation, where coal, dusted docks, and the crushing realities of heavy industry loomed over every single voyage. For centuries, timber had been the lifeblood of maritime trade, but by the 1880s, the wooden age was gasping its last breath. The maritime world was shedding its organic skin in favor of something cold, rigid, and immensely powerful. While the 1862 launch of the Merchant had experimentally proved that iron hulls could survive the freshwater gales, it wasn't until the 1890s that steel became the undisputed king of the inland seas. This shift was fueled by the red gold rush, an insatiable global hunger for the iron ore buried deep within the Mesabi Range of Minnesota. To move millions of tons of this dense, heavy cargo, the old ways of shipbuilding were no longer sufficient. Shipyards evolved into thunderous assembly lines of giants, powered by revolutionary new technologies like pneumatic rivet guns and towering gantry cranes. These advancements allowed workers to hammer steel into shape at a staggering, almost frantic pace. By the turn of the century, the 400-foot barrier, once thought to be the limit of maritime engineering, had been shattered. By 1900, the first 500-foot freighters began to darken the horizon of Lake Superior, casting long, ominous shadows over the smaller vessels that had once ruled these waters. It was into this atmosphere of industrial hubris that the SS D.M. Clemson was born. Launched in 1903 by the Providence Steamship Company at the American Shipbuilding Company's yard in West Superior, Wisconsin, she was more than just a freighter. She was the company's crown jewel. Stretching 448 feet in length, the Clemson was a steel leviathan that represented the pinnacle of contemporary engineering. Unlike the wooden ships of the past that groaned and flexed under the weight of the lake's short-period waves, the Clemson was a rigid fortress of heavy steel plating and reinforced hatch covers. She was designed with a singular, aggressive purpose to dominate the most unforgiving elements on the planet. And for years, she did exactly that. On her maiden voyage, the 13th of August, 1903, she steamed into Duluth and loaded a staggering 7,725 long tons of iron ore. When she reached her destination in Ohio, she had obliterated the haulage record previously held by the William Edenborn. This was the beginning of a legendary run. By 1904, the Clemson was a household name in maritime circles, setting new benchmarks for coal and grain, at one point hauling over 8,400 tons in a single journey. To the merchants of the era, the Clemson was a symbol of American industrial supremacy, a vessel that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. However, the strength of a ship is only as reliable as the man who commands her. At the helm of this powerhouse was Captain Samuel R. Chamberlain, a veteran whose name was synonymous with expertise and calm under pressure. With over 30 years of experience navigating the inland seas, Chamberlain was a master of his craft, who had survived every mood Lake Superior had to offer. He was known for a meticulous, technical understanding of his vessel, a trait that earned him the respect of both his crew and his employers. But as the 1908 shipping season began, the context of Chamberlain's command changed. This was to be his final watch. After 3 decades of battling the Witch of November, Chamberlain was just days away from a well-earned retirement. While the public saw an invincible record breaker, the Clemson's private logs told a much darker, more forensic story of decay. She was often called a lucky ship, but a closer look at her service history reveals a trail of structural trauma that would have sidelined a lesser vessel. The death by 1,000 cuts began almost immediately. In October 1903, just months after her triumphant launch, the Clemson ran aground on a mud bar in Canute, Ohio, a minor incident that nonetheless stressed her brand-new hull. 2 years later, in September 1905, she faced a near catastrophe on Lake Superior. A storm described by the Cleveland Leader as unsurpassed smashed 2 of her critical hatch covers. Massive waves boarded her decks, flooding the hold and causing her dense ore cargo to shift violently. The ship developed a terrifying 4-foot list to starboard and had almost no freeboard left. Chamberlain's skill allowed him to limp the wounded Titan into Two Harbors, Minnesota, but the structural integrity of the ship had been pushed to its absolute breaking point. The bad luck continued. In June 1907, the Clemson was involved in a violent collision in heavy fog with the whaleback James B. Nielsen on Lake Huron, leaving her port side forward of the coal bunkers heavily damaged. On the 20th of October 1908, she struck the Ashtabula Harbor Light Pier with such force that the pier was knocked 4 inches out of alignment, damaging 10 of the ship's hull plates and a water tank. Only 4 days later, on October 24, while navigating through the thick, choking smoke of forest fires that obscured the lakes, she ran aground once more at Point Pelee. Each of these events was a warning shot from the lakes, yet because the damage was often above the waterline or deemed non-critical to her immediate buoyancy, the repairs were frequently temporary or delayed. This brings us to the core of the analytical mystery, the Achilles heel. In the high-stakes, high-pressure world of the iron ore trade, time was the only currency that mattered. The Providence Steamship Company needed the Clemson on the water, not in a dry dock. Each time she was patched up with temporary welds and sent back out to meet the season's quotas, her structural safety margin grew thinner. To Chamberlain and his crew, each survival reinforced the false belief that the Clemson could handle anything. They saw her as an indestructible fortress, but in reality, by the end of 1908, she was a weary, battle-scarred vessel held together by hope and stopgap engineering. The grounding at Point Pelee and the strike at Ashtabula had likely left hairline fractures and weakened rivets throughout her frame, scars that were invisible to the naked eye, but catastrophic under the twisting strain of a major gale. As the calendar turned toward the final freezing days of November 1908, a heavy, unsettling atmosphere, thick enough to taste settled over the industrial docks of Lorain, Ohio. The SS D.M. Clemson sat ominously low in the slate-gray, ice-flecked water. Her massive steel flanks were being fed a final, massive ration of coal, the black dust coating the snow, and the shivering men on deck alike. To the casual observer, or the desk-bound executives at the Providence Steamship Company, it was a scene of triumphant Gilded Age industry, the record breaker preparing for one last profitable dash through the Sulaks to Duluth. But beneath the thunderous, rhythmic din of the coal chutes and the sharp, rhythmic hiss of escaping steam, a subtle, primal shift was occurring that no ledger could capture. In the high-stakes, high-mortality world of Great Lakes sailing, there is a phenomenon often whispered about in the dim galleys and cramped bunkrooms: sailors' intuition. It is a collective, unspoken vibration, a primal sixth sense that warns a seasoned crew when a vessel has transitioned from a floating home to a structural hazard, when a ship, quite literally, has lost its soul and become a hollow shell of its former self. As the Clemson prepared for what was framed by the company as a routine end-of-season run, the first fractures didn't appear in her steel hull plating, but in the psychological resolve of the men who knew her, every groan and shudder. Two veteran sailors, men who had spent decades weathering the most violent, ship-breaking gales Lake Superior could conjure abruptly, walked off the ship while she was docked in Lorain. Their departure was not a matter of striking for better wages, nor were they called away by sudden family emergencies. They walked away because of a profound, unshakable sense of impending dread that they could not articulate but could not ignore. To these seasoned mariners, the Clemson felt different on this voyage. Perhaps, in the dead quiet of the night, they had heard the sinister groan of the temporary hull patches, those metal bandages from the Ashtabula collision, shifting and straining in even the light harbor swells. Perhaps they saw the Witch of November reflected in the hollow, tired eyes of a ship that had been pushed too hard, too fast, and too often. Whatever the exact catalyst, they chose the stark uncertainty of unemployment and the social shame of jumping ship over the perceived death sentence of the voyage. In their place, the company, prioritizing the schedule over experience, quickly hired two local men from the Lorain docks. These were laborers, likely desperate for any paycheck, as the winter freeze approached and jobs became scarce, who saw the vacancy not as a dark omen, but as a stroke of incredible luck. They stepped onto the gangplank with the tragic, bright optimism of the uninformed, blissfully unaware that they were signing their own death warrants to fill the physical voids left by intuition and experience. This unsettling change in the ship's human heartbeat stands in heartbreaking, poetic contrast to the domestic scenes unfolding within the ship's cramped quarters. As the Clemson's departure time neared, the air in the galley and the engine room was thick with the scent of coal dust, harsh tobacco, and wet ink. Many of the 24 men on board spent their final hours in port, hunched over narrow wooden tables, drafting hurried letters to mothers, wives, and children. These were not letters written with a sense of foreboding, but rather documents filled with warm domestic promises. They wrote of their detailed plans for Christmas 1908, assuring their loved ones that they would be home for the holidays with pockets full of seasonal pay. For the younger deckhands, many of them in their teens or early 20s, this late-season trip was a vital financial lifeline, a holiday bonus that would pay for a celebratory family feast or a winter's supply of heating coal for a drafty clapboard family home in Ohio or Michigan, they viewed the treacherous, freezing waters of Lake Superior not as a predator waiting to swallow them, but as the final, necessary hurdle between them and the warmth and sanctuary of the family hearth. These letters, some of which were dropped into the dockside mail slot just minutes before the massive lines were cast off, remain the last breathing evidence of a crew that was vibrant, ambitious, and tragically mortal. They weren't just names on a manifest. They were sons and fathers counting the agonizing days until they could leave the steel Leviathan behind. Early 20th century maritime economics, the Great Lakes shipping industry was not a community. It was a theater of ruthless, Gilded Age efficiency where human lives were often weighed against the cost of a ton of coal. The Providence Steamship Company was under immense, systemic pressure to squeeze every possible cent of profit out of their floating assets before the sewlocks froze solid and the shipping lanes became impassable walls of ice. To the executives in their opulent, wood-paneled offices, the Clemson was not a battle-scarred veteran with structural time bombs ticking in her hull. She was a multi-million-dollar asset that needed to perform its function. Despite the dangerously late date, the falling barometer that indicated a massive storm system, and the ominous weather report screaming of an impending Great Lakes whiteout, the mandate from the owners was absolute and unwavering. One last load. This was the profit at all costs philosophy that defined the era, where the safety of the crew was a secondary variable in the equation of wealth. Captain Samuel R. Chamberlain, despite his 30 years of hard-won wisdom and his reputation as one of the finest skippers on the lakes, found himself trapped in a psychological pincer move. In that era, a captain's reputation and his precarious, much-needed pension upon retirement depended entirely on his absolute loyalty to the company's grueling schedule. The owners pressured him, arguing that a ship of the Clemson's caliber, a vessel that had shattered speed records and survived the 1,905 storm unsurpassed, was surely capable of outrunning one more winter gale. It was a classic, deadly confrontation between corporate greed and natural reality. Chamberlain, perhaps blinded by his own desire to end his long career on a high note, or perhaps simply weary of the corporate lash and the threat of replacement, made the fateful choice to ignore the omens. He ignored the barometer, he ignored the jump sailors, and he ignored the groans of his own ship. By the dawn of the 1st of December 1908, the atmospheric transition from the vibrant, crisp colors of a late North American autumn into the punishing, monochromatic gray of a primeval winter was absolute. In the iron-scented sub-zero air of Duluth, Minnesota, her massive steel holds were being gorged with a dense, unforgiving shipment of iron ore, destined for the ravenous, glowing furnaces of the steel mills on the lower lakes. The air itself felt heavy with the charge of impending meteorological violence. The barometric pressure was plummeting at a rate that signaled a generational storm. On the shoreline, the red storm warning flags flying from the weather stations were a silent, frantic scream about a severe cyclonic disturbance, a low-pressure bomb tearing across the Great Plains and gathering moisture and fury as it surged toward the open waters. Captain Samuel R. Chamberlain gave the command to cast off. The massive hemp lines were hauled in. The giant steam-powered propeller churned the slush-filled harbor water into a thick white froth, and the 448-foot steel Leviathan turned her bow toward the gray, terrifying expanse of Lake Superior. As the Clemson steamed eastward into the churning, hungry maw of the lake, the weather did not merely turn bad as they cleared the pierheads. It disintegrated into a Great Lakes whiteout, a terrifying, localized meteorological phenomenon where the boundaries between the leaden sky and the freezing water vanish into a single blinding wall of horizontal snow and frozen spray, driven by gale force 10 to 12 winds. With sustained screams of 60 miles per hour and gusts punching upward of 70 to 80 miles per hour, the lake transformed into a chaotic, lunar landscape of zero visibility. In these conditions, the water temperature hovers just degrees above the freezing point, and any spray that crests the bow or crashes over the deck instantly freezes upon contact, turning into tons of black ice that rapidly accumulate on the masts, rigging, and superstructure, adding thousands of pounds of top-heavy weight. It was in this hellish, crystalline environment, near the vicinity of Chris Point, that the Clemson was spotted one final time by the lookout on the SS J.J.H. Brown. This final sighting, a ghost-like image of a ship struggling through the veil of snow, remains the most haunting what-if in the annals of Great Lakes maritime history. The captain of the J.J.H. Brown was a man who possessed a deep, primal respect for the terrifying intensity of the gathering November which the term sailors use for these sudden, lethal gales. He made a calculated, survivalist decision. He steered his vessel toward the northern route, seeking the desperate shelter of the Canadian shoreline, where the rugged landmass acts as a natural windbreak to shatter the fetch and fury of the winds. Chamberlain, however, made a different and ultimately catastrophic tactical choice. He steered the Clemson toward the southern route, attempting to make a desperate, high-speed run for the Portage Canal. It was a gamble of staggering, almost arrogant proportions. Chamberlain likely hoped the canal would provide a shortcut to the relative safety of the Keweenaw waterway, but in his haste to beat the storm, he inadvertently placed his battle-scarred vessel directly into the fetch, the longest, most uninterrupted stretch of open water on the lake, where the wind has hundreds of miles of runway, to build waves into towering ship-breaking walls of green water. This is the precise point where the technical vulnerabilities we have analyzed, the hidden scars of the Clemson, intersected with the cold, mathematical laws of physics and naval architecture. The Clemson was hauling iron ore, a cargo that is notoriously the most unforgiving material a sailor can carry. Because iron ore is so incredibly dense, it occupies a very small volume relative to its weight, leaving massive, empty internal voids within the cargo holds. If even a moderate amount of water enters the hold, the ore does not simply get damp. It turns into a heavy, shifting, liquefied slurry that acts like a massive internal wrecking ball. As the Clemson hammered into the massive short-period waves of Lake Superior waves that strike with the frequency of a jackhammer, her long steel hull would have begun to work, a nautical term for the terrifying flexing and twisting of a ship's frame under stress. This hull had already been weakened by previous high-impact collisions at Ashtabula and Point Pelee earlier in the year. The structural memory of those impacts meant that the rivets were already strained and the steel plates were primed for failure. The reinforced steel hatch covers, which were the crowning pride of her 1903 engineering design, now tragically became her Achilles heel. In the blinding horizontal snow and sub-zero temperatures, the crew would have been battling advanced stages of hypothermia and physical exhaustion just to remain upright on the ice-coated pitching deck. It is highly probable, according to maritime experts, that in these subhuman conditions, the crew was physically unable to fully secure and dog down every single one of the dozens of hatch clamps required to make the ship watertight. As the green water solid waves that do not break but roll over the deck with the weight of concrete crashed over the Clemson, thousands of gallons of Lake Superior began to pour into the cargo holds through the microscopic gaps in the unsealed hatches. This introduced the free surface effect, where the weight of the water sloshing back and forth, combined with the shifting, liquefied iron ore, stripped the Clemson of her inherent stability. A vessel that was once celebrated as a record breaker and a titan of the fleet was now a drowning, unstable weight, her center of gravity shifting uncontrollably with every agonizing, deep roll into the trough of the waves. In the frozen, screaming heart of that December gale, there was no SOS. There was no wireless distress call to pierce the static and the roar of the wind, for the Clemson predated the widespread use of shipboard radio. The Clemson did not simply sink in the traditional sense. Forensic reconstructions suggest she experienced a sudden catastrophic failure, a maritime event so violent and total that it leaves no time for the launching of lifeboats. Whether her weakened hull plates finally buckled under the immense hydrostatic pressure, or she simply took one final terminal roll and capsized under the weight of the ice and shifting ore, the end was swift, absolute, and merciless. By the time the J.J.H. Brown finally limped into the safety of the northern shore, the SS D.M. Clemson had literally blinked out of existence. She left behind nothing but a vast, churning graveyard of white water, crushed ice, and the deafening silence of 24 souls. The indestructible ship had met a force that cared nothing for speed records, corporate shipping quotas, or a veteran captain's dreams of retirement. It only cared for the microscopic structural flaws and the hidden scars she had tried so desperately to hide. The Titan was gone, swallowed by the cold, deep abyss of the greatest lake in the world, leaving a mystery that would remain locked in the dark, pressurized depths for over a century. When the catastrophic gale finally broke on the morning of the 4th of December 1908, a haunting, hollow silence descended upon the industrial docks of Lorain, Ohio, and Duluth, Minnesota. The SS D.M. Clemson was overdue. At first, the Providence Steamship Company maintained a veneer of Gilded Age optimism, issuing statements to the press that the ship had likely found shelter in some remote, unnamed bay, or that her engines had simply succumbed to the ice. But as the days bled into a week, that corporate optimism soured into a cold, paralyzing dread. The harbor became a theater of silent agony. The families of the 24 crew members gathered in small, shivering clusters, their eyes fixed on a gray, empty horizon, waiting for a plume of smoke that would never appear. In the biting wind, women clutched shawls and fathers stared at the vacant ship slips, realizing with every passing hour that the record breaker, the steel titan they loved, had likely become a tomb. The first physical confirmation of the disaster materialized along the desolate, ice-encrusted shoreline near Grand Marais and Chris Point, where a sprawling debris field began to reveal a story of unimaginable violence. Searchers walking the beaches found heavy wooden shards, splintered by immense hydrostatic pressure, yet still bearing the unmistakable proud block letters, D.M. Clemson. Then came the high-value forensic details that spoke of the sheer ferocity of the ship's final moments. A massive, jagged section of the pilot house and a heavy intact cabin door were discovered washed ashore miles apart. For these massive upper-tier structures to be completely sheared off a steel hull of the Clemson's caliber, the external force of the waves, or perhaps an internal pressure, must have been astronomical. Even more chilling was the discovery of a specific fragment of the ship's upper cabinetry bearing the scorched, jagged marks of a catastrophic explosion. This led maritime experts to a terrifying hypothesis. As the Clemson foundered, her stern dipping beneath the freezing waves, the icy water of Lake Superior, hovering at a lethal 32 degrees Fahrenheit, likely rushed into the engine room. When that sub-zero water contacted the red-hot pressurized Scotch boilers, they would have detonated with the force of a naval mine. This internal blast would have literally blown the ship's superstructure apart from the inside out, explaining why massive sections of the pilot house were found torn from their steel moorings. The human cost of this mechanical failure was revealed shortly after near the shoreline of Grand Marais. Several cork life jackets were found, followed by the most haunting sight of all, the frozen bodies of several sailors washed ashore. In a detail that breaks the heart of any observer, these men were found with their life jackets securely and meticulously fastened. This was a testament to their desperate, disciplined struggle to survive in the pitch-black chaos of a Lake Superior gale. However, in the 32 degrees Fahrenheit water of the north, the human body is no match for physics. They had not drowned in the traditional sense. They had succumbed to hypothermia in less than 15 minutes. They died waiting for a rescue that could not see them through the blinding whiteout, their final moments spent in a freezing void, realizing that their steel fortress had betrayed them. The disappearance of the Clemson was not merely a tragedy, it became a legacy of reform. The horror of 24 men vanishing aboard a modern, state-of-the-art steel ship forced the maritime industry to abandon its dangerous Gilded Age arrogance. For too long, ship owners had believed that steel made them gods over the water. The Clemson proved them wrong. Her loss led to the immediate and permanent tightening of winter navigation safety regulations on the Great Lakes. New mandates were established for the structural integrity and locking mechanisms of hatch covers, and the shipping industry was forced to adopt much more conservative sailing windows during the treacherous transition into late November and December. The profit-at-all-costs era was for a moment silenced by the grief of Lorraine and Duluth. Yet, despite the reforms and the decades of searching, the greatest mystery of the Great Lakes graveyard remains unsolved. For over a century, shipwreck hunters equipped with the latest technology have scoured the depths of Lake Superior's eastern basin. As recently as May 2025, the discovery of the James Carruthers, another legendary ghost ship that vanished in 1913, closed a significant chapter of maritime history. But with the finding of the Carruthers, the SS D.M. Clemson officially inherited a grim and lonely new title. She is now the largest undiscovered shipwreck remaining on the Great Lakes. Resting in an estimated depth of over 650 feet, in a region where the bottom is a jagged landscape of canyons and silt, she remains a phantom. She has eluded the most advanced side-scan sonar and autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs. It is as if the lake itself has conspired to keep her hidden, perhaps to protect the secret of her final agony. Today, as we look back across the century, we bow our heads in silent remembrance for the 24 souls who remain on eternal watch beneath the ice of Lake Superior. We are left to wonder, was it the shifting weight of the oar, the failure of the hatch clamps, or the Achilles heel of those neglected temporary repairs that finally sealed their fate? Perhaps Lake Superior keeps the Clemson hidden because the truth of her final moments is simply too violent for the world above to handle. As the modern giants of the lake's vessels over 1,000 feet long now pass over her suspected grave, the question remains for us all. In the unending race between corporate profit and human safety, have we truly internalized the lessons of 1,908? Or are we simply building bigger, more sophisticated titans, only to feed them to the same ancient and unforgiving storms? The Clemson remains down there, a silent, steel warning whispered in the freezing currents, waiting for the day her scars are finally brought to the light. Before concluding today's message, thank you for standing watch with me through this dark chapter of history. We bow our heads for the 24 souls of the SS D.M. Clemson, lost the 1st of December 1908. Since May 2025, she remains the largest phantom of the Great Lakes. May they find peace in the eternal deep. If this journey into the abyss moved you, please support our mission by liking, sharing, and subscribing for our upcoming investigations. If you have a personal story or a theory regarding this maritime tragedy, please share it in the comments below. I read them all. We'll meet again in our next voyage on the channel.